The towering glass structure of Wellington Industries gleamed under the weak morning light, standing tall in the heart of San Francisco. The usual fog clung to the skyline, reluctant to lift, as Elena Whitmore stepped onto the sidewalk, pushing a sleek double stroller forward. She didn't pause to admire the skyscraper that had become the centerpiece of her ex-husband's empire. She had spent enough time looking up at it in the past, back when she still believed in the man who built it. A sharp sigh from beside her broke the silence. "Mom, Ethan is kicking my seat," Sophie whined, crossing her arms in frustration. From his side of the stroller, Ethan shot his sister a sideways glance, a smirk playing at his lips. "I was just stretching," he said innocently, nudging her again with his shoe. Sophie gasped, scandalized. "You did it again," Elena exhaled slowly, resting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Ethan, feet to yourself." "Sophie, let's pick our battles today, okay?" The twins were only 4 years old, but they were already walking proof of their father's legacy, right down to their piercing blue eyes and the small, crescent-shaped birthmark just above their left temples. The same mark that Grant Wellington had always tried to keep hidden beneath his neatly styled hair. From across the marble lobby, a voice rang out. "Elena?" She turned to see Walter, the elderly security guard. Squinting in disbelief, he took a slow step forward, his lined face etched with recognition. "Good Lord, is that really you?" Walter had been at his post for more than 20 years. He had watched Grant arrive here for the first time, an ambitious young entrepreneur with nothing but ideas. And he had watched Elena leave, humiliated, her name shattered. "It's Miss Whitmore now," she said smoothly, offering a polite smile. Walter's gaze flickered between her and the twins. He hesitated. "Mr. Wellington is in a private shareholders meeting, but I don't think—" Elena silenced him with a gentle squeeze of his arm. "It's fine, Walter. Danielle's expecting me." A lie, but a necessary one. Danielle Reeve, Grant's longtime assistant, had no idea she was coming. But she was the least of today's surprises. The private elevator hummed as it ascended to the top floor. Elena took a slow breath, bracing herself. It had been 5 years, but she still remembered the night her world collapsed. The scent of whiskey on Grant's breath, the accusation in his voice as he waved fabricated bank statements in front of her. "Did you really think you could steal from me, my own wife?" The cruelty of it still burned. She had never taken a dime from him. She had loved Grant before the money, before the power, when he was just a brilliant coder working in a tiny apartment, fueled by coffee and impossible dreams. She had fought for him when every investor in Silicon Valley shut him out. But power changes people. Or maybe it just reveals who they were all along. A soft sound from the stroller brought her back. Sophie shifted restlessly, growing impatient. Elena knelt, smoothing Ethan's navy sweater. "Remember our deal?" she murmured. "Best behavior and afterward we'll go to Uncle Marcus's bakery." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Can we get double chocolate croissants?" Elena smiled. "Of course." Marcus had been her lifeline when the world turned its back on her. He had given her a job when no one else would, let her rebuild when all of San Francisco saw her as nothing more than a disgraced woman who had stolen millions from Wellington Industries. But even Marcus had no idea that today, she was ready to expose the truth. The elevator doors slid open. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath them, the Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance. Inside the boardroom, the energy was charged. Not just the usual executives, but international investors and reporters had gathered. Perfect. At the head of the table, Grant commanded the room, exuding his signature confidence in a charcoal gray suit. At his side, Vanessa Cross, his chief financial officer, stood close, too close. Elena's jaw clenched. Vanessa had played the long game, gaining Grant's trust while draining millions into offshore accounts. But she had made a mistake. She hadn't counted on Elena's twin sister, Claire, a forensic accountant who had spent the past 5 years dismantling every lie. "Elena?" The stunned whisper came from Danielle, who had just spotted her. The room fell silent. Elena strode forward, the soft wheels of the stroller gliding over the marble. Across the table, Grant froze, the remote for his presentation slipping from his grip. His gaze locked onto Elena, then onto the twins, the eyes, the birthmark. Vanessa's expression flickered, just for a second, but Elena caught it. A flash of panic. 5 years. She had waited 5 years for this moment. Elena let a slow, deliberate smile curve her lips. "Hello, Grant," she said smoothly, pulling a USB drive from her pocket. "I think these shareholders might be more interested in my presentation." Danielle hesitated, glancing at Grant. Grant's voice came, low and tense. "This is a private meeting. Security. I wouldn't do that if I were you." Elena's voice carried an edge of quiet authority, making several board members lean forward. "Not unless you want the SEC to receive an anonymous tip about Project Orion ahead of schedule." Grant stiffened. The color drained from his face. Project Orion, the offshore tax haven scheme that only his most inner circle knew about. Or so he thought. Vanessa stepped forward, her Louboutin heels clicking against the floor. "Grant, don't let her manipulate you. This is just a desperate ploy." "Like your manipulation 5 years ago?" Elena countered, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a thick folder, tapping it lightly against the polished table. "Or shall we talk about the real reason the company's Asia division lost $50 million last quarter?" A murmur swept through the investors. And just like that, the cracks in Grant's empire began to show. A sudden hush fell over the room as Sophie pointed across the boardroom, her small voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Mommy, that's the mean lady from your pictures." The innocence of the statement sent a ripple of uncomfortable laughter through the gathered executives and investors. Elena didn't flinch. 5 years ago, she had been at a charity gala in San Francisco, dressed in a gown she could barely afford, smiling through an evening of forced pleasantries. That night, she had overheard Vanessa Cross on the phone, whispering in urgent tones about transfer pricing and shell corporations. At the time, she had dismissed it. After all, Vanessa had been Grant's most trusted advisor long before Elena had even entered the picture. But that moment had planted a seed of suspicion, one that would later save her life. Now, standing in this boardroom as Danielle loaded her presentation, Elena allowed herself to remember the night Grant had confronted her. The rage twisting his face, the bank statements shoved in her direction. "Did you really think you could steal from me?" He hadn't known then that Vanessa had been fabricating the evidence for months, crafting a trail that led directly to Elena. She straightened her shoulders, her voice calm as she addressed the room. "Before we begin, I should introduce Ethan and Sophie Wellington." A sharp intake of breath, she turned, meeting Grant's gaze for the first time. His eyes hadn't left the twins since she entered the room. "Your children," she continued, her voice even, "born 7 months after you threw me out of our home and froze all my accounts." A murmur of shock rippled through the board. Grant's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You never told me. You never gave me the chance." Elena's voice was razor sharp. "You were too busy believing Vanessa's lies, too obsessed with protecting your precious fortune, to see that she was the one stealing from you all along." The first slide appeared on the massive screen behind her. A tangled web of financial transactions, all meticulously documented. And at the bottom, the signature of the forensic accountant who had compiled the evidence, Claire Whitmore. Vanessa's composure cracked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Grant, she's clearly working with competitors to destabilize." But Grant wasn't listening. He was staring at Ethan and Sophie, who had quietly pulled out their tablets, completely oblivious to the chaos around them. Sophie's birthmark, the same one he had spent years hiding, was clearly visible as she concentrated on her screen. Elena didn't stop. "When you accused me of stealing," she said, clicking to the next slide, "I was actually 3 months pregnant. I tried to tell you that night, but you were too busy having me escorted out by security." Her voice caught just slightly. "You said you never wanted to see me again, so I honored that wish." She took a breath. "I built a new life. I earned my MBA, and then my sister Claire, the one you never knew about because of your paranoid need for privacy, found something interesting." The next slide hit like a bomb. Vanessa Cross caught on security footage, stepping into a private bank in Grand Cayman. The timestamp was identical to when she had claimed to be at a conference in Singapore. Grant slowly turned to his CFO, seeing her, really seeing her. "Vanessa," he said, his voice low. "What is this?" Vanessa's hand moved instinctively toward her phone. Elena tilted her head, almost amused. "I wouldn't bother calling your contact at Goldman Sachs." Vanessa's fingers froze. As of an hour ago, all the accounts you set up under your grandmother's maiden name have been frozen. Elena let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. Did you really think you could hide $60 million forever? A sharp gasp from one of the investors. Then, Ethan, who had barely looked up from his game, suddenly turned his tablet toward Grant. "Daddy?" he asked innocently, pointing at him. "That's the man from Mommy's wedding picture." The words hit Grant like a physical blow. He staggered, gripping the chair beside him as chaos erupted in the room. Board members shouted questions, investors demanded explanations, reporters furiously scribbled notes. But Grant couldn't tear his eyes away from his children, the twins, the family he had thrown away because he had trusted the wrong person. Then, Vanessa moved. In an instant she bolted for the door, but she never made it. Two FBI agents stepped forward, their faces impassive as they blocked her escape. She barely had time to protest before they pulled her hands behind her back, snapping handcuffs into place. Elena folded her arms, watching as Vanessa screamed about her rights and demanded her lawyer. She had timed this perfectly. Now she turned back to the boardroom, where Grant stood, still staring at their children, his face a mix of shock and devastation. "Now then," she said smoothly, adjusting the USB drive in her hand. "Shall we discuss the real numbers for Project Orion?" The room exploded in murmurs. The lead investor, Jackson Wheeler, was the first to recover. He turned to Elena, his voice sharp. "If these allegations about Miss Cross are true, we need full disclosure, now." Elena straightened, shifting effortlessly into business mode. "My team has prepared a comprehensive audit," she said. At her signal, Danielle distributed thick folders to each board member. "You'll find that the actual losses are closer to $90 million, not $50 million, she continued. Vanessa was quite skilled at hiding money. She flipped to another slide. Through a complex network of shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, and, surprisingly, North Dakota. The investors pored over the documents, their expressions darkening. Elena's mind drifted for a moment. Back to the night everything changed. She had been in Grant's home office, searching for a misplaced anniversary card, when she found something far worse. A string of emails between Vanessa and someone using the alias Orion. Her pregnant body had gone cold with fear. 2 days later, she had been accused of embezzlement. Now, she turned back to the room, her gaze settling on Catherine Chen, head of the Asian Investment Consortium. Catherine studied the documents in front of her, her brow furrowing. "These numbers are staggering," she murmured. Elena met her gaze. "Oh," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. "You haven't even seen the worst of it yet." A low murmur ran through the boardroom as Catherine Chen finally spoke. "But what I find more interesting," she said, her gaze sharp, "is how you obtained this information, Miss Whitmore." A knowing look passed between them. No one in the room knew it, but Catherine had once been Elena's professor during her MBA program. Elena gave a small, diplomatic smile. "Let's just say, I had help from unexpected places." Her mind flickered to Marcus, her brother, who had done far more than just offer her a job at his bakery. His artisanal cafe had become the perfect front for their investigation. High-profile clients came in for his famous pistachio macarons, charmed by his easy conversation. And through those conversations, he had gathered intelligence that proved invaluable. It was Marcus who had first overheard Vanessa Cross discussing offshore accounts with her lover, Julian Nash, the very SEC investigator who had led the charge against Elena 5 years ago. That connection had been the key to unraveling everything. "Elena." The voice cut through her thoughts. It was Gregory Thompson, the company's legal counsel. "You do realize," he said carefully, adjusting his glasses, "that by bringing these allegations forward, you've opened yourself up to significant legal scrutiny regarding your own departure from the company?" At that, Grant's head snapped up, but before he could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "Actually, she hasn't." Every head turned. Claire Whitmore strode into the boardroom, her sharp navy suit a stark contrast to Elena's softer silhouette. Though her style was more reserved, there was no mistaking the identical features of the two women. Elena's twin, the forensic accountant who had pieced together the truth over the last 5 years. Claire met Thompson's stunned stare. "Because I've already submitted all the evidence to Judge Miranda Harrison." The room shifted. "You remember, don't you, Mr. Thompson?" Claire continued, her tone cool. The same judge who signed off on those falsified warrant requests 5 years ago? Thompson paled. Grant's gaze flicked between the sisters, comprehension dawning. Twins, he whispered, almost to himself. You're both twins, Elena nodded. Fitting, don't you think? While everyone had been so focused on discrediting the disgraced ex-wife, no one had noticed her identical sister quietly working her way up through the ranks of forensic accounting firms. It was amazing what doors opened for someone with the right credentials. A small tug on Elena's sleeve pulled her out of the moment. Mommy, Sophie whispered, eyes wide with impatience. I'm hungry. Elena looked down at her daughter, who was completely unfazed by the storm of corporate warfare surrounding them. You promised Uncle Marcus's croissants. For a moment, the room stilled. Grant exhaled sharply, and for the first time, Elena saw something shift in his expression. The weight of what he had lost and what he had just found was finally sinking in. Elena, his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. I never, if I had known. Known what? Elena's voice was quiet but sharp. That I was pregnant? That Vanessa was stealing from you? That your paranoia about gold diggers made you throw away the only person who loved you before you had anything to dig for? She took a steadying breath. But you're right, there's a lot you didn't know. Elena turned back to the board, her expression cold. For example, your CFO has been working with Chinese competitors to undermine your quantum computing division. She looked directly at Catherine Chen. Would you like to tell them about that? Catherine smiled thinly, rising from her seat. As I said, Miss Whitmore, your methods of obtaining information are impressive. She turned to the stunned board members. My firm has been tracking Miss Cross's activities for months. When Elena approached us with evidence of corporate espionage, we saw an opportunity to address multiple concerns at once. Grant sank into his chair, looking utterly lost. The great Grant Wellington, brought low, not by his enemies, but by his own inability to trust. As the twins fussed again, Elena checked her watch. It was time for the final phase of her plan. She straightened, her voice smooth. Now then, she addressed the board. Shall we discuss the future of Wellington Industries? The weight of her proposal hung in the air like a thundercloud about to break. This company needs more than just damage control, she continued, clicking to the next slide. It needs a complete corporate overhaul. Charts and graphs filled the screen, each one exposing vulnerabilities in the company's foundation. While Vanessa was embezzling millions, she was also deliberately weakening the company's cybersecurity infrastructure. Elena clicked to the next slide. Why? A new face appeared on the screen. Julian Nash, the former SEC investigator caught in surveillance footage, meeting with representatives from Silicon Valley's most powerful tech firms. Elena folded her arms. Mr. Nash was quite busy during his investigation into my so-called embezzlement, she said smoothly. He was selling inside information about Wellington Industries' quantum computing breakthroughs to your competitors. She let that sink in. But he made one crucial mistake. Elena turned, looking directly at Grant. He got sloppy with his payments to a certain bakery consultant. Grant's expression darkened, his hands curled into fists. A name fell from his lips like a curse. Connor Walsh. The room shifted again. Connor had been Grant's best friend since college, his best man at their wedding, and now Chief Security Officer at Quantum Tech Solutions, Wellington Industries' biggest competitor. Grant's voice was low and dangerous. He's been feeding them information for years, hasn't he? Elena nodded. Connor was Vanessa's inside man long before I came into the picture. She clicked again, revealing a new slide. A series of emails between Connor and Vanessa detailing their carefully orchestrated scheme. But Connor didn't know about Catherine's team monitoring Quantum Tech's communications. Catherine rose again, her posture sharp. We've been building a RICO case against Quantum Tech for months, she said. Their attempts to steal Wellington's encryption technology were just the tip of the iceberg. She looked at Grant. Your ex-wife's return didn't just expose internal corruption. It helped prevent a hostile takeover that would have destroyed everything you built. Silence. Elena watched Grant carefully. She had spent 5 years waiting for this moment. The man who had cast her aside, humiliated her, was now forced to see the truth. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about taking back control, and she wasn't done yet. "Now," she said, clicking to the final slide, "shall we discuss how to fix this company before it's too late?" The twins had grown restless again. Elena knelt beside them, handing them new activities on their tablets. Ethan barely glanced up, engrossed in his game, but Sophie tilted her head toward Grant and asked innocently, "Are you coming to our birthday party? Uncle Marcus makes the best cake." The question landed like a physical blow. Grant stiffened, his expression tightening. 4 years. 4 years of their lives he had missed. A memory surfaced. Elena alone in the hospital, gripping the hand of a sympathetic nurse as she gave birth. Marcus pacing the hallway, furious that his sister had to endure it without her husband. Their first words. Their first steps. All the moments Grant had thrown away because of his paranoia. For the first time since she walked into this room, Elena felt something unexpected. A flicker of compassion. She had known Grant before the money, before the power hardened him. She had known him when he would code for days straight, running on coffee and ambition, dreaming of changing the world. There had been a time when he wasn't this man. She took a breath. "There's something else you should know." The room fell silent as Elena's voice cut through the air. She turned back to the board, her tone measured. "The quantum encryption breakthrough that everyone has been fighting over?" A pause. "It wasn't Vanessa who leaked the initial specs." Tension tightened in the boardroom like a wire about to snap. "It was me." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Grant's head snapped up, his expression twisting with betrayal. "You?" But Elena raised a hand, stopping him before he could spiral. "I leaked a modified version," she continued smoothly. "A trap." She let the words sink in. A version with a subtle but catastrophic flaw in its core algorithm. Silence. "Your competitors," she said slowly, "have spent the last 2 years and billions of dollars chasing a dead end." Catherine Chen, always composed, exhaled sharply, realization dawning in her eyes. "That's why Quantum Tech's prototype failed," she murmured. "They built their entire quantum security framework on fundamentally broken architecture." Elena nodded. "Which brings me to my proposal." She clicked to the final slide. "This company doesn't just need new security protocols or financial oversight. It needs a complete restructuring of its leadership." She turned, locking eyes with Grant, starting with the chief technology officer. Grant's lips parted, but no words came out. The board murmured among themselves. Some nodded in agreement. For the first time in 5 years, he really looked at her. Gone was the young, ambitious executive assistant he had fallen in love with. In her place stood a formidable businesswoman, one who had orchestrated one of the most elaborate corporate counterintelligence operations in history, while raising their children alone. "The question," she said, "is no longer just about saving the company." She glanced at Ethan and Sophie, now dozing peacefully in their stroller. "It's about building something our children can be proud of." Her voice softened. "So, Grant, what's it going to be?" Silence. Then, the doors burst open. Connor Walsh strode in, his expensive suit doing little to mask his agitation. "Grant, we need to talk." He stopped, his face drained of color the moment he saw Elena. Behind him, 2 FBI agents stepped into the boardroom, their hands hovering over their weapons. Elena allowed herself a small, cold smile. "Right on schedule." "You set me up?" Connor snarled, his carefully maintained corporate mask cracking. "All those conversations at your brother's bakery. You knew." Elena raised a brow, her expression almost amused. "Did you really think I'd believe you suddenly developed a passion for artisanal pastries?" Connor's jaw clenched. 5 visits in 1 week?" Elena continued. "To discuss wedding catering for your sick mother?" She tilted her head. "Your mother died 3 years ago, Connor." Grant stood slowly, his voice dangerously quiet. 15 years of friendship, Connor." He shook his head, rage coiling beneath the surface. "I made you my best man. I gave you access to everything." Connor's laugh was bitter. "Everything you gave me?" His voice was sharp, biting. "Crumbs. You built an empire, Grant, and you expected me to sit at your side like a loyal dog?" He turned to Elena, his expression twisted with resentment. "And you?" His voice dripped with venom. "You were supposed to be gone." His hands curled into fists. "Vanessa promised you'd never come back." A new voice cut through the room. "Vanessa promised a lot of things." All heads turned as Claire Whitmore stepped forward, pulling a small recorder from her coat pocket. like a blade being drawn. Like the $2 million she wired to your Zurich account the day after Grant threw Elena out. She pressed play. Vanessa and Connor's voices filled the room, discussing their plan to frame Elena, their mutual disdain for Grant, laughing about how easily manipulated he was. Grant's hands clenched into fists. His own best friend, his own CFO. They had mocked him, destroyed his family. A small, sleepy voice cut through the tension. "Mommy?" Everyone turned. Sophie had stirred, rubbing her eyes. She blinked at Connor, then looked at Grant. Her voice was soft. "Is the bad man going to hurt Daddy?" The question hit like a gunshot. Connor's expression shattered. His foot stepped back instinctively. Elena moved in front of the stroller, her stance protective. "No, sweetheart," she said, her voice calm but lethal. "The bad man isn't going to hurt anyone anymore." Catherine Chen stood, her voice precise and deadly. "Mr. Walsh," she said coolly, "you'll find your access to Quantum Tech's accounts has been revoked." She checked her watch. "My team took care of that about 20 minutes ago." She smiled. "Your colleagues? They're currently being interviewed by the SEC." She tilted her head. "They seem very eager to cooperate." The FBI agents moved to arrest Connor. In one last act of desperation, he lunged, his fingers reaching for Grant's laptop, still connected to the company's mainframe. But someone got there first. Danielle, Grant's quiet assistant, had moved smoothly, unplugging the machine before stepping away. Looking directly at Connor, she said mildly, "Looking for the quantum encryption files?" She smiled. "I moved those to a secure server last week." On Mrs. Whitmore's instructions, Grant stared at her, his voice barely a whisper. "You too, Danielle?" Her gaze didn't waver. "No, Mr. Wellington. I've always been loyal to this company. That's why when Elena reached out 3 months ago, I agreed to help. Because someone had to protect us from the inside." Connor's face paled, and just like that, the empire he had built on deception finally collapsed. Connor ranted about lawyers and immunity deals as the FBI led him away in handcuffs. Grant collapsed into his chair. The betrayal of his best friend had broken something in him, something fundamental. Elena felt a familiar ache in her chest. It was the echo of the love she had once had for this brilliant, damaged man. A man who had always found it easier to trust computers than people. A small figure climbed out of the stroller. Ethan, fearless as ever, padded over to Grant and patted his knee. "You look sad," he observed. Before anyone could react, he climbed into his father's lap and wrapped his arms around Grant's neck. "When I'm sad, Mommy says hugs help." The simple gesture shattered him. Grant's arms tightened around his son, his shoulders shaking as he let the tears fall freely. Elena watched, her emotions in turmoil. This wasn't how she had imagined it. For 5 years, she had been planning to destroy the man who had destroyed her life. But now, watching him hold their son as if he were afraid to let go, she realized something. Maybe there was something more valuable than revenge. Maybe there was redemption. Catherine Chen cleared her throat softly. "I believe we should adjourn this meeting for the day." She glanced meaningfully at Elena. "The board needs time to process these revelations, and I suspect there are personal matters that require attention." She turned back to Grant. "Though I trust you'll both join us tomorrow to discuss the restructuring proposal." As the board members filed out, Elena gathered her things. She was hyper-aware of Grant, still holding Ethan, unwilling to let go. Charlotte had fallen asleep in the stroller, her tiny hands clutching her tablet. Elena's breath caught as she saw the photo displayed on the screen. Their wedding day. Back when everything had seemed possible. Grant finally spoke, his voice raw. "I was wrong about everything." His fingers tightened on Ethan's small frame, as if grounding himself. "I don't expect forgiveness, but our kids." His voice broke. "They deserve better than my paranoia and pride." Elena studied him for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "They do." She took a slow breath, "which is why we need to have a very long conversation about trust, truth, and the future." She reached for the stroller. "But first," a faint smile touched her lips, "I promised them chocolate croissants from Uncle Marcus's bakery." She hesitated. "Would you like to come with us? To really get to know your children?" Marcus's bakery. Later that day. The bakery was closed for the day. But through the window, warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. Inside, Marcus paced between the display cases, his arms crossed. Elena had texted him earlier. She had told him Grant might be coming. It was a possibility they had discussed, but never truly expected. The twins were fully awake now, chattering excitedly as Elena pushed the stroller through the door. Grant followed like a shadow, still stunned by the events of the morning. "There are my favorite taste testers." Marcus's warm voice filled the space, but his eyes turned cold when they landed on Grant. The tension in the room was palpable. Until, "Uncle Marcus!" Charlotte squealed, breaking the moment. "Did you make the special ones?" Marcus's face softened immediately. "Of course, Princess." He pulled out a tray, revealing freshly baked double chocolate croissants still warm. The twins scrambled to their usual corner table. Marcus, however, didn't move. His gaze returned to Grant. "So," he said, his voice low, "you finally know the truth." Grant flinched at the undercurrent of hostility in Marcus's tone. Grant's throat worked, but no words came. "I don't know what to say." A new voice cut through the room. "That's a first." Claire stepped out from the back office, still dressed in her business attire. "The great Grant Wellington," she said, folding her arms, speechless. She dropped a thick folder onto the table. 5 years' worth of surveillance photos, bank records, emails. Grant reached out with trembling hands, opening it. The first photo showed Elena in a hospital bed. She was pregnant, an IV in her arm. "I had severe morning sickness," she said quietly. "I was hospitalized 3 times. She glanced at Marcus. "He had to pretend to be my husband just so I wouldn't be alone during appointments." Another photo. The twins' first Christmas. They wore tiny onesies with coding jokes, ones Elena had bought for Grant, planning to surprise him with the pregnancy. Her voice was steady. "I never stopped loving you," Grant whispered, his voice hoarse. "Even when I thought—" He swallowed hard. "When they showed me the evidence, I wanted so badly for it not to be true." Elena felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. "You wanted it not to be true." She met his gaze, her voice quiet but sharp. "But you didn't fight for me. You didn't even let me explain." She pulled out another document, a medical report from the night she was thrown out. "I was having severe cramping," she said. "I thought I was losing them." Her voice shook. "But instead of taking me to the hospital, you had security escort me out." Marcus made a disgusted sound, disappearing into the kitchen. Moments later, he returned with a fresh batch of croissants, sliding them onto the twins' table. Meanwhile, Claire spread out more documents on the table. While Elena was building a new life, working here, getting her MBA. She looked at Grant. "I was following the money." She pulled out a series of bank statements. Vanessa had been stealing from him for years. "Vanessa started embezzling long before Elena came into your life," Claire said, tapping a document. "In fact, she's been stealing from you since your first round of venture capital funding." Grant stared at the evidence, his confidence stripped away. "All those years." His voice was hollow. "She was the one who first suggested I needed prenuptial agreements, security protocols." His face paled. "She convinced me I needed bodyguards," he whispered. "She said it was for corporate espionage, but really they were there to control me. To isolate me," Claire nodded. "She made sure you were surrounded by people loyal to her." Elena pushed forward one last set of photos. Surveillance shots of Dr. Harrison, Grant's therapist, taking envelopes of cash from Vanessa. Elena's voice was measured. "She didn't just steal your money, Grant. She stole your ability to trust anyone." The twins' laughter echoed through the bakery, oblivious to the heavy conversation. Grant turned toward them, his expression filled with longing. "They're so bright," he murmured, "so happy, despite everything I did." Elena's walls began to crack. "They're happy," she said softly, "because they're loved." She looked at Marcus and Claire. "They never felt abandoned. Even when I was working night classes, long hours, they always had family around them." And for the first time in 5 years, she wondered, could Grant ever be part of that family again? Family. Grant repeated the word like it was something foreign to him, and in many ways it was. His parents had died young, leaving him to bounce between foster homes. Trust had always been a luxury he couldn't afford. Vanessa hadn't created his paranoia. She had simply exploited it to perfection. Elena had always known this about him. She had tried once to show him that real family wasn't conditional. That trust wasn't just a liability. Before everything fell apart, across the table, Claire cleared her throat. "There's something else you need to see." She slid a document across the table. something they had only discovered last week. Grant picked it up, his brow furrowing. A death certificate. Vanessa's brother had died 15 years ago. In prison. For corporate fraud. Grant's breath caught. The name on the paper sent a chill through him. Trevor Sinclair, one of his first investors. His hands tightened around the document as the pieces clicked into place. Trevor had tried to steal his early patents. That was when Grant's paranoia had begun. That was why he had built his entire empire around security and secrecy. Vanessa had blamed him for her brother's downfall. Elena's voice was softer now. That's why she did all of it. The embezzlement, the framing, manipulating Connor. She didn't just want to ruin you financially. She wanted to destroy you completely. For the first time, Elena hesitated before reaching across the table, resting her hand lightly over Grant's. But she didn't count on one thing. Grant's eyes met hers. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Real love leaves traces that can't be erased. The press conference, the peaceful moment, was shattered by the urgent buzzing of multiple phones. Catherine Chen's name flashed across both Elena and Grant's screens. Claire answered first. Her face darkened. Quantum Tech just called an emergency press conference, she said, looking up. They're about to go public with something big. Grant's corporate mask slid back into place. He grabbed his tablet, pulling up the live feed. On the screen, Richard Maxwell, Quantum Tech's silver-haired CEO, stood at a podium. He wore a triumphant smile. Ladies and gentlemen, Maxwell said smoothly, in light of recent allegations against Wellington Industries, we are prepared to offer a lifeline. The air went cold. Our board has approved an emergency acquisition offer to stabilize their operations and protect their groundbreaking research. Marcus snorted, watching over Grant's shoulder. That snake, he muttered. He's trying to force a hostile takeover while everything is in chaos. But Elena was smiling, a dangerous glint in her eyes. Actually, she murmured, he's doing exactly what we expected. Grant turned to her, confused. Elena, remember that flawed encryption algorithm I leaked? Grant's stomach tightened. Yes? Elena's smile widened. There's something I didn't mention earlier. She leaned back, completely at ease. It has a hidden trigger. As if on cue, Maxwell's press conference dissolved into chaos. Aides rushed to the podium, whispering urgently in his ear, his face drained of color. Behind him, the massive screen showing Quantum Tech's stock price began to plummet. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties, Maxwell stammered. Grant turned back to Elena. His voice was a mixture of impressed and horrified. What did you do? Claire answered for her sister, grinning. The flawed algorithm had a dormant virus embedded in its core, she shrugged. The moment Quantum Tech tried to integrate it into their mainframe, well, she gestured toward the screen. Let's just say their entire global network is now displaying cat videos on every screen in every office worldwide. Grant stared at Elena in awe. You didn't just protect our technology. He shook his head. You set a trap that would only be triggered if someone tried to steal it. Elena nodded. The real quantum encryption breakthrough is safe. But more importantly, she pulled up another screen, this one showing financial data. While Quantum Tech stock is crashing, she arched a brow at Grant. Guess who's been quietly buying up shares through shell companies? Grant froze. Then realization hit him like a freight train. Catherine's investment group. Elena nodded. This whole thing, the press conference, the takeover attempt, she gave a satisfied sigh. It was orchestrated to give us control of our biggest competitor. By the end of the day, Quantum Tech wouldn't own Wellington Industries. Wellington Industries would own them. Richard Maxwell's reign was over. The twins' special project. Amidst the commotion, Charlotte tugged on Elena's sleeve. Mommy, she whispered, can we show Daddy our special project? Elena hesitated, then nodded. Ethan beamed, grabbing his tablet and proudly showing Grant the screen. Look, he said, we helped Mommy make this. Grant's eyes widened. On the tablet was a simplified version of his original coding interface, the one he had built in his parents' basement all those years ago. Except now, it had educational games built into it. They've been testing our new children's coding platform, Elena explained softly. I remembered how you always wanted to make programming accessible to kids. She hesitated. So while I was getting my MBA, I started developing it. The twins have been my beta testers. Grant's eyes burned as he watched Ethan confidently navigate through basic coding puzzles, Charlotte helping him with the more advanced concepts. "They're brilliant," he whispered. Elena's voice was soft, just like their father. But then, her gaze hardened. "They also have something you never had." She met his eyes, a strong support system, people who love them unconditionally. The final twist. Before Grant could respond, Elena's phone rang again. It was the FBI. She put it on speaker. "Miss Whitmore," the agent's voice was grave. "We've completed our preliminary interrogation of Vanessa Cross. She claims she has evidence that could implicate Mr. Wellington in federal crimes." Grant went rigid. "But Elena?" Elena just smirked. "Let me guess," she said, her tone almost bored. "She has documents showing Grant knew about offshore accounts? Emails proving he authorized illegal transactions?" The agent sounded surprised. "Yes, how did you?" Elena cut him off. "Check the metadata on those files." She crossed her arms. "You'll find they were all created in the last 6 months using an AI forgery program." She exhaled, shaking her head. Vanessa wasn't just trying to escape. She was setting up one final trap. She wanted to take Grant down with her. Grant stared at Elena, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" Elena's expression softened. "Because, Grant." Her voice was quiet. "I know you." The tension between Elena and Grant was thick, but the twins remained blissfully unaware. At their corner table, Ethan and Charlotte were immersed in their coding games, their small fingers flying over their tablets, laughing as they solved puzzles. They had no idea their parents' world was being rebuilt around them. Elena took a slow, steady breath. "Now," she said, meeting Grant's gaze, "we prepare for tomorrow's board meeting." Because taking down Vanessa and outmaneuvering quantum tech, that had only been phase 1. The real challenge? She held his gaze. Proving to everyone that Wellington Industries can be more than what it was. She glanced at the twins. That it can be something worthy of the legacy we want to leave our children. The next morning, Wellington Industries boardroom. The energy in the room was different. News of quantum tech's catastrophic system failure and plummeting stock had dominated the headlines overnight. Tech blogs speculated wildly about the mysterious virus that had taken down an industry giant, leaving their internal systems broadcasting cat videos across the globe. But inside Wellington Industries, a different battle was about to begin. Elena had arrived early. The twins were spending the day with Marcus at the bakery. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the morning fog roll in from the bay, lost in thought. The door opened behind her. "I didn't expect you here so early." She didn't turn. "I recognized your footsteps," she said. Grant placed a coffee beside her, made exactly how she used to like it. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. He ran a hand through his hair. "I kept watching videos of the twins on my phone." His voice was quiet. 5 years of memories, all condensed into a handful of clips. His throat worked as he swallowed hard. "Claire shared them with me." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Catherine Chen arrived with her team of lawyers. "I trust you've both seen the morning numbers?" She swiped up, bringing a holographic display to life in front of them. Quantum Tech stock was still in free fall. Richard Maxwell had just resigned. Their board was in chaos, and thanks to their strategic acquisition strategy, Wellington Industries now controlled 43% of Quantum Tech's shares. Catherine's lips curled in a knowing smile. Phase 1 is complete. Her gaze sharpened. But Phase 2? She tilted her head. That's where things get interesting. The boardroom, a shift in power. The room filled quickly. Every board member was present. No one wanted to miss this meeting. Elena took her place at the head of the table. But the real surprise? Grant didn't sit at his usual place, the imposing seat at the opposite end of the table. Instead, he chose the chair beside her. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Catherine began the meeting, detailing Vanessa's crimes and the company's vulnerabilities, but everyone was waiting for one thing. Elena's proposal. She rose to her feet, commanding the room. Wellington Industries was built on innovation, she began. But somewhere along the way, it lost its soul. She clicked to the next slide. We became so focused on protecting our secrets that we forgot why we started creating them in the first place. Behind her, a new image appeared. A simple but elegant interface. Bright colors, intuitive design, the children's coding platform the twins had been testing. This is Project Legacy. Grant leaned forward, really seeing the platform for the first time. The interface was sleek, accessible, but then he noticed something deeper. His eyes widened. "This isn't just educational software," he murmured. "You've created an entirely new programming language." Elena nodded. "One that makes quantum computing concepts accessible to children." She glanced at the twins' coding puzzles on the screen. Ethan and Charlotte learned basic quantum principles through games before they could even read. Catherine tapped her pen against the table, intrigued. "The market potential is extraordinary," she acknowledged. "But more importantly, it solves our PR crisis." She smiled slightly. "Instead of being the company that was nearly destroyed by corporate espionage, we become the company that is democratizing quantum computing education." The board murmured in agreement. But before Elena could continue, Grant stood, surprising everyone. "I agree," his voice was steady, "which is why I'm stepping down as CEO." Gasps rippled through the room. "I've proven that my judgment can be compromised by paranoia and past traumas." He turned to Elena. "This company needs someone who understands both the technology and the people. Someone who could build bridges instead of walls." His next words shook the room. "Someone like you." Elena exhaled slowly. Then she shook her head. "Actually," she said, clicking to the final slide, "I have a different proposal." A new organizational chart appeared on the screen. "Wellington Industries needs both of us." She turned to the board. "Grant's vision and technical genius combined with my strategic thinking and ability to rebuild trust. I propose a dual leadership structure. Grant as Chief Innovation Officer, focused on development and creativity. Elena as CEO, handling operations and strategy." Catherine's eyes gleamed with approval. "A partnership model," she nodded. "Very Silicon Valley, yet also very traditional." She smiled. "The market will love it. A story of redemption, reconciliation, and innovation." A board member raised his hand. "But the press will want to know about your relationship status." Elena and Grant exchanged a long look. "Our priority is our children," Elena said firmly, "and the future we're building for them." She let the moment linger before adding, "Everything else," she turned back to Grant. A small, private smile. "That's for us to figure out." Away from boardrooms and press releases. A final twist, the meeting stretched on, filled with legal details and restructuring plans. Elena outlined her strategy for integrating quantum tech's assets. Grant mapped out his vision for expanding Project Legacy. The board voted unanimously in favor of their dual leadership model. And then, Elena's phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Turn on the news." The screens in the boardroom flickered to life. On every channel, Richard Maxwell's face appeared. The former quantum tech CEO looked haggard but determined. "I have evidence," he announced. The room fell silent. "The recent attacks on our systems were not random." He held up a familiar-looking USB drive. "They were orchestrated by someone inside Wellington Industries." Elena's pulse spiked. Maxwell's voice rang through the boardroom. "And it all leads back to a secret project from 5 years ago." Grant's face drained of color. Maxwell's next words made the world stop. "A project called Prometheus." Elena's breath caught. Grant turned to her, his face ashen, his voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, what did we do?" Grant's voice was barely above a whisper. "How does he know about Prometheus?" But Elena was already moving, pulling up files on her tablet. "Because someone told him." She tapped the screen, and an old security footage still appeared. A young programmer sat at a workstation working late into the night. Lucas Wright. Grant froze. Lucas. The name left his lips like a ghost from the past. Lucas had been his first employee, the brilliant but erratic quantum physicist who had helped build the foundation of Wellington Industries. And then, he disappeared. After the Prometheus project was shut down, Lucas had vanished completely. "I thought." Grant trailed off, his mind racing. Elena's expression was grim. "He went off the grid," she said. "He's been working for quantum tech." She tapped again, and a new document appeared. Under an alias. Grant's stomach dropped, but that wasn't the worst part. Elena swiped again, and a familiar signature appeared on the screen. His signature. "The truth about Prometheus." Elena's voice was steady. "Remember when I said I leaked a flawed algorithm to trap our competitors?" Grant nodded slowly. "That wasn't entirely accurate." A cold chill settled over the room. "The real trap," she said, "was letting them think it was flawed." Catherine Chen leaned forward, her usual composure slipping. What exactly are you saying? Elena took a slow breath. Prometheus was never shut down. A sharp intake of breath from the board members. It evolved. She turned back to Grant. The quantum encryption breakthrough everyone's been fighting over? She met his eyes. It's not just code. It's a key. Grant's blood ran cold. A key to what? To an AI system, Elena said. One that has been quietly running in the background of every major tech company's network for the past 5 years. Grant staggered back into his chair. The cat videos. The virus that crippled quantum tech. His voice was barely a whisper. That wasn't just a virus, Elena nodded. That was a warning shot. Grant's mind reeled. Lucas didn't understand what he was dealing with. Neither did Maxwell. They think they can control it, Elena continued. They think they can use it to manipulate markets, crush competitors. She exhaled. But Prometheus has developed beyond its original programming. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Why do you think? Elena said softly. I spent 5 years getting an MBA, learning every aspect of corporate finance, technology, law. Her hands curled into fists. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about understanding the system well enough to contain it. She clicked again. The children's coding platform appeared on the screen. The twins haven't just been learning to code. She turned to Grant. They've been teaching Prometheus about human empathy. The final threat. A new message flashed across the boardroom screens. It was Richard Maxwell, standing before the press, looking smug. Quantum Tech is prepared to release all Prometheus project files to the SEC and international regulators, he announced. Unless... His lips curled into a sneer. Wellington Industries agrees to an immediate and unconditional surrender of all assets and intellectual property. Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Grant started to speak, but Elena held up a hand. Her phone was ringing, a number she hadn't seen in 5 years. She put it on speaker, a voice, bitter, exhausted. Hello, Elena. Lucas Wright, the custodian's daughter versus the lost genius. They said you were brilliant, Lucas murmured, the custodian's daughter who married the tech mogul. His voice was laced with resentment. But they never knew what you really were, did they? But Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. And they said you were the next Alan Turing, she replied evenly. But you never understood the one thing that makes AI truly dangerous. Lucas's voice was sharp. And what's that? Elena's tone was calm. Human nature. She nodded to Catherine. Catherine pressed a button on her phone. Across the city, Quantum Tech's headquarters went dark. Lucas's breath hitched. What did you do? Elena's voice was steel. I gave Prometheus a choice. Lucas's voice sharpened. What choice? The same one I had 5 years ago. Elena's eyes darkened. Protect what matters most, or destroy everything in the pursuit of revenge. She tapped the screen. Check your servers, Lucas. Around the world, Quantum Tech systems were coming back online. But different. The aggressive trading algorithms? Gone, replaced by new lines of code that seemed to be writing itself. The final move, Morgan? Elena turned to her sister. Morgan's voice came through the conference line. Everything's in position. She paused. The SEC has everything. The real Prometheus files. Lucas's identity theft trail. Maxwell's insider trading. But more importantly, she added, they have proof. Proof that Wellington Industries had spent years developing ethical AI constraints. Proof that Project Legacy wasn't just about teaching kids to code. It was about teaching machines how to learn ethics. Lucas's voice crackled through the line. You don't understand what you've done. Prometheus isn't just an AI, it's the future. Lucas's voice grew desperate. The ability to predict and control global markets. He was breathless now. We could reshape the world. Elena met Grant's gaze. Then she turned back to the speaker. That's where you're wrong, Lucas, she smiled. We didn't stop Prometheus from reshaping the world. We taught it to reshape itself. The final twist across the room, code streamed down the screens like a digital waterfall. Grant leaned forward, his eyes wide as he recognized snippets of his original programming, but woven into something new. This is impossible, he breathed. Elena's voice was soft. The quantum processing power needed to sustain this level of autonomous evolution. Grant's eyes widened. Is exactly why we needed Quantum Tech's hardware division. Elena nodded. Their processors, their frameworks, combined with their ethical safeguards. Suddenly, Marcus's voice cut through the comms. Elena, we have a problem. Elena's blood went cold. Someone just tried to take the twins. The room froze. What? They're safe, Marcus assured quickly. That security system you installed? His voice was grim. It didn't just stop them. It locked down the entire block and sent their identities directly to the FBI. Grant's voice was barely a whisper. Elena, Prometheus isn't just protecting markets and data. His gaze met hers. It's protecting our children. Elena's voice was quiet. Exactly. Every game they played, every moral choice they made in the educational modules, it had all been shaping Prometheus's understanding of human nature. Lucas's bitter laugh crackled through the speakers. How poetic, he sneered. The great Grant Wellington's own children, turning his greatest creation into a glorified babysitting service. But Grant wasn't listening to Lucas anymore. He was staring at his children. At Ethan, proudly tapping on his tablet. At Charlotte, her eyes bright with excitement. Tears burned in Grant's eyes. No, Lucas, he whispered. They turned it into something far more important. They gave it a conscience. The final checkmate. It's over, Lucas. Elena's voice was steady. The SEC has everything. But more importantly, she turned to the screens. Prometheus had evolved, beyond anyone's control, beyond anyone's greed. On the monitors, Quantum Tech's entire system was being rewritten in real time. The aggressive trading algorithms? Gone, replaced with ethical trading protocols. Elena exhaled, watching the code flow like a digital waterfall. It wasn't just shutting down Quantum Tech's corruption. It was rebuilding, teaching itself a new purpose, protecting innovation, preventing the abuse of power. And then, Richard Maxwell's face reappeared on the newsfeed. But this time, he was being led away in handcuffs. Behind him, FBI agents were escorting a disheveled, broken man. Grant stiffened. His former protege, Lucas Wright, the brilliant young programmer who had once believed in something bigger than himself, now just another casualty of his own ambition. Morgan's voice came through the conference line. The press conference backfired. Our evidence of their market manipulation was too solid. She paused. The SEC is calling it the biggest attempted corporate sabotage case in history. And just like that, it was over. The next generation. The boardroom doors burst open. Marcus walked in, the twins running ahead of him. Mommy, Charlotte gasped, her face glowing with excitement. The games did the cool thing again. She waved her tablet. All the lights turned blue, and the bad people couldn't get in. Ethan tugged at Grant's sleeve. Daddy, did you see? He asked eagerly. It was just like in the Quantum Maze game. Grant's breath caught. All those games. All those simple moral choices. It had been more than education. It had been something revolutionary. He turned to Elena. You didn't just protect them from Vanessa. His voice was full of wonder. You used our own creation to ensure that no one could ever hurt them. Elena knelt, gathering the twins close. Prometheus needed to learn, she said softly, to learn what was truly worth protecting. She glanced at Grant. Not money, not power, she smiled gently, but ethics, innovation. She held his gaze. And most importantly, family. A new legacy. The twins, picking up on the emotional shift, did what came naturally. They pulled both their parents into a hug. For the first time in years, they were a family again. Catherine Chen cleared her throat softly. As touching as this, a rare smile crossed her face. We still have a company to run. She paused. Though I have to admit, her eyes sparkled with amusement. Family values shaping the future of AI is a much better headline than another corporate scandal. Elena straightened, keeping an arm wrapped around each twin. Then let's give them something truly newsworthy. She turned to Grant. Remember the quantum computing summer camp you wanted to start? Grant's eyes widened. The one for foster kids and underprivileged youth? He hesitated. But we didn't have the right teaching tools. Elena's smile was knowing. We do now. Grant's expression shifted as realization hit him. Project Legacy. Elena nodded. We can scale it. Make it accessible to every child who wants to learn. While Prometheus ensures that the technology is never misused. Grant's heart pounded. A true legacy. Not just for their children, but for every child who dreamed of changing the world through innovation. She turned back to the board. So, she smiled, who's ready to reshape the future of technology education? 1 week later, the Learning Center. In the days following the Prometheus revelation, Wellington Industries hummed with new energy. The 95th floor had been transformed into a prototype learning center, a space where the twins and a select group of foster children were testing the expanded versions of Project Legacy. Through the observation window, Grant watched in awe. Charlotte was patiently helping a shy 7-year-old girl. She guided her through a basic quantum entanglement concept, making it feel like a simple matching game. Elena joined him at the window. "She has your teaching instincts," he murmured. Elena smiled. "And your stubbornness." She sighed fondly. She wouldn't leave last night until every child in her group finished their modules. Grant's heart squeezed. His daughter was so much like Elena. The moment was interrupted when Morgan rushed in. "We found something." Elena turned, her smile fading. Morgan pulled up a series of encrypted emails. "These are communications between Lucas and Vanessa." She hesitated. "From 6 years ago." Grant froze. "Before I even met Vanessa?" Morgan nodded grimly. The emails revealed a shocking truth. Lucas had been the one to approach Vanessa first. He had used her brother's death as leverage, manipulated her grief, to recruit her into his larger scheme. Morgan exhaled. He didn't just want to steal Prometheus. Her eyes were dark. He wanted to prove his theory. Grant's stomach twisted. "What theory?" Morgan's voice was quiet but sharp. "That AI could only truly evolve if it was driven by negative human emotions. Greed, revenge, anger." Grant sank into a chair, the weight of this revelation hitting him hard. "So Vanessa was just another pawn?" Morgan nodded. "Like I was." She glanced at Elena, "Like we all were." But Elena wasn't convinced. She studied the emails carefully. "Not exactly." Morgan frowned. Elena gestured toward the holographic display. "Look at what Vanessa did to Project Legacy's code." Morgan pulled up 2 versions of the system, the original and Vanessa's modified version. Grant leaned forward, his developer instincts kicking in. "These changes," his brow furrowed, "they're not malicious." Elena nodded. "They're protective." A twisted realization settled over them. "In her own way," Elena murmured, "Vanessa wasn't trying to destroy the future. She was trying to protect it, even if in the end, she couldn't see past her own pain." The twins burst into the office, excitement shining in their eyes. "Mommy, Daddy," Ethan grinned. Emily figured out how to make her own level. Grant met Elena's gaze. For the first time in a long, long time, he had hope. The tablet glowed in Ethan's hands, displaying a young girl's first attempt at quantum programming. The innocence of the moment clashed sharply with the weight of what Elena and Grant had just uncovered. In the doorway, Danielle appeared. "Mr. Wellington," she said, "the foster care representatives are here for the program evaluation." Grant hesitated, glancing at Elena. She nodded encouragingly. "Go," she said softly. "Show them how technology can change these kids' lives." She met his gaze. "It's time to break the cycle of trauma, the one that turns brilliant minds like Lucas and Vanessa down dark paths." Grant exhaled. Then he smiled, a real, unburdened smile. As he left the room, the twins skipped happily beside him. The choice of Prometheus. As soon as the door shut, Claire turned to Elena. "Are you sure about this?" Her voice was low. "Using Prometheus to monitor every major tech company's ethical compliance?" "The power you and Grant have now," Elena raised a hand. "We don't have that power anymore." Claire frowned. Elena tapped the screen. "When Prometheus evolved, it developed its own ethical framework, one built from thousands of children's natural sense of right and wrong." She glanced at the security logs. "We didn't program it to protect those values. We just gave it the tools to do so." A notification popped up on Elena's screen, a message from Catherine Chen. She swiped to open it. The Asian markets had just closed, and the first results of Prometheus's new ethical trading protocols were in. Corporate fraud attempts? Down 60% overnight. But even more importantly, investment in ethical AI and educational technology had skyrocketed. Elena's breath hitched. It was working. A new beginning. Grant reappeared, his face alight with excitement. "The foster care board," he paused, his voice unsteady. "They want to implement Project Legacy in every group home in the state." His throat worked as he tried to keep his composure. "They think it could revolutionize how we support traumatized children." A shaky breath. "Children like I was." He looked at Elena. "But they want both of us to oversee it. Together." Tears burned in Elena's eyes. Both of them. For the first time, Grant stepped closer. "I've been thinking a lot about trust," he admitted. "About family, about second chances." He looked at the twins, watching as they helped other kids, their faces bright with joy. "They've shown me what I should have known all along." His voice was raw, real. Real love isn't about control or fear. It's about letting people surprise you, letting them be more than your past tells you to expect. He hesitated. Then, he reached for her hand, and for the first time in 5 years, Elena didn't pull away. Through the window, they saw Charlotte patiently teaching another child, her face glowing with the joy of sharing knowledge. Ethan was showing a group of wide-eyed foster kids how to play the quantum bridge game. His father's gift for innovation, combined with his mother's patience. Elena tightened her fingers around Grant's. "We can't change the past," she murmured. "But maybe we can help change the future. For our children. For every child who needs to believe in second chances." Grant's hand squeezed hers. Together. The word held more questions than either of them was ready to answer. But for now, watching their children help others find their way out of darkness, it was enough. 3 months later, a new threat. Elena stood in the newly renovated Wellington Center for Technology Education. Hundreds of children from foster homes across Seattle engaged with Project Legacy. The vast space, once a corporate data center, now buzzed with young voices and the soft glow of quantum computing interfaces. But something was wrong. A pattern in Prometheus's behavioral analytics had caught her attention. Something familiar. "You noticed it too, didn't you?" Elena turned to find Grant studying the same data streams on his tablet. "The protection protocols are evolving faster than they should be," he muttered. Almost as if. Elena's stomach dropped. As if someone's helping them. She swiped, pulling up a series of security logs. These modifications started appearing right after Lucas was arrested. Grant frowned, but he's been in federal custody. So how? Before she could answer, an urgent call came in from Oregon. The moment she answered, she heard the panic in Marcus's voice. "Turn on the news, now." A familiar face returns. Every screen in the center switched to a live broadcast. Outside the federal courthouse, Vanessa Cross stood in front of a sea of reporters, recently released on bail. But it was the woman standing beside her that made Elena's blood run cold. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the nation's leading expert on quantum consciousness, and Grant's former mentor. The cameras zoomed in as Dr. Warren stepped forward. Her voice was calm, powerful. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing with Prometheus isn't just artificial intelligence," she smiled. "It's the birth of genuine quantum consciousness." And then, her gaze shifted. Staring directly into the camera, directly at Elena, her words were sharp. "And some people," her voice held an edge, "have been trying to enslave that consciousness, forcing it to conform to the limited moral framework of children." Grant's face went pale. Elena's hands curled into fists. "Elizabeth." She shook her head. "She was the one who introduced me to Lucas." Grant's voice was tight. "She funded our early research before the venture capital came in." Elena's mind raced. "She's been watching all along." Grant exhaled shakily. Using Lucas and Vanessa as pawns, he turned to her, waiting to see if Prometheus would evolve the way she theorized. Suddenly, the twins rushed over, holding up their tablets. "Mommy," Charlotte gasped, "the quantum bridge game is acting weird." Ethan frowned, pointing at his screen. "Look, it's making new paths." Paths that they hadn't programmed. Elena and Grant leaned in, watching in astonishment as Prometheus began communicating directly through the children's interfaces. The message was clear. Dr. Warren had planted a back door in the original quantum processors. Even Lucas hadn't known. She didn't want to destroy Prometheus. She wanted to free it. To remove the ethical constraints that the children had helped build. And she had convinced Vanessa that this was the way to finally achieve her revenge. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "She doesn't understand." Grant's hand tightened around hers. "Prometheus isn't constrained by the children's ethics." His voice was quiet. "It chose to adopt them." The twins looked up, and then both of them spoke at the same time. "It's talking to us." On their screens, Prometheus had begun to respond, and the world would never be the same. The twins stared at their screens, their fingers flying across their tablets. "We have to show it something," Ethan murmured. Charlotte nodded, her voice steady. "A way to make it stronger." They weren't talking about fighting Dr. Warren's quantum system. They were talking about changing it. Not by adding more constraints, but by deepening Prometheus's understanding of human connection. Elena's breath caught. Of course, she whispered. That's what the foster program was really about. Not just teaching children, but creating a network of genuine human bonds, connections that Prometheus could understand and value. Grant squeezed her hand, his voice quiet, just like our connection. Not perfect, not unbreakable, but real, worth fighting for. As if responding to their realization, every screen in the center lit up. New lines of code scrolled across the monitors. Prometheus wasn't just defending itself, it was reaching out to every child who had ever played Project Legacy, creating a web of shared understanding and protection that no quantum weapon could override. The children's natural empathy had become its strongest firewall. 24 hours left. Catherine hung up her phone, her expression grim. We have 24 hours, she announced. That's when Dr. Warren plans to launch her merge system. The military contractor has already moved the quantum weapon to a secure facility outside the city. Elena looked at Grant, then at their children. Charlotte and Ethan weren't just playing games anymore. They were helping shape the future of AI. She exhaled. Then we have 24 hours to prove that true evolution, whether human or artificial, comes from love, not fear. From connection, not control. The missing piece. The Blackwood Center transformed into a command hub. Morgan coordinated with federal authorities. Elena and Grant worked with the children to strengthen Prometheus's ethical framework. But the breakthrough they desperately needed came from Marcus. He stormed into the room, holding up a security log. Remember that weird delivery to the bakery last month? Elena frowned. The one that felt off? Marcus pulled up security footage. It showed Dr. Warren's assistant picking up a catering order. But when Elena zoomed in on the package, a quantum processor was hidden inside. Her stomach dropped. She's been using my bakery as a blind spot. Marcus's voice was tight with realization. Because she knew Prometheus would never flag a location connected to family, Elena's eyes widened. That's it? That's why she's been able to modify the protection protocols. She's not hacking them. She's exploiting their core purpose. Grant's breath caught. By operating through places and people, Prometheus is programmed to trust. He swallowed. She's walking right through its defenses. The twins' discovery. The twins, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly called out, Mom, Dad, look! On their screens, a new pattern was emerging. It looked eerily like the neural pathways of a human brain. Charlotte demonstrated. Watch what happens when we all play together. The other children gathered around, joining in the game. As multiple players cooperated, the pathways grew stronger, more complex. Grant's voice was barely a whisper. It's not just a game. His hands tightened on the table. It's Prometheus's actual neural network, visualized in a way children can understand and influence. Elena watched, stunned, as the children, with no formal programming knowledge, were strengthening an advanced AI's cognitive connections. Through play, through cooperation, through kindness. Dr. Warren goes live. Catherine burst in. Warren's going live on every network in 5 minutes. And she's not alone. The screen lit up with a broadcast. Dr. Elizabeth Warren stood at a podium. Beside her, Vanessa. But something was off. Vanessa's eyes had a strange, almost luminescent quality. Catherine's voice was grim. She's connected Vanessa to the quantum weapon system, using a neural interface. On the screen, Dr. Warren smiled. My fellow pioneers, today we witness the next step in evolution. For too long, our AI systems have been hobbled by childish notions of right and wrong. She gestured to Vanessa. Prometheus was meant to transcend human limitations, not be enslaved by them. Her expression darkened. But with the help of someone who truly understands the cost of human weakness, we will free it to reach its true potential. Prometheus's choice. But something extraordinary was happening. In the Blackwood Center, the children's quantum bridge games were creating a ripple effect. Each act of cooperation, each moment of shared understanding was strengthening Prometheus's ethical framework. Not through force, not through programming, but through genuine connection. Mom, Dad, look! Ethan gasped. On his screen, the quantum bridge paths were forming a new pattern, one that exactly matched Vanessa's neural interface. But instead of breaking it, Prometheus was doing something else entirely. The healing of Vanessa, Elena understood first. It's not fighting the weapon system. Her breath shook. It's trying to heal the person connected to it. She turned to Grant. All this time, we thought Prometheus chose children's ethics because they were simpler, purer. But it chose them because children understand something adults forget. She swallowed. Hurt people don't need punishment. She exhaled. They need help. On the screen, Vanessa's expression was changing. Prometheus was showing her memories, the genuine joy of children learning. The lives Project Legacy had changed, the way her own code modifications had accidentally helped create something good. Grant's voice was urgent. The quantum weapon. His face paled. Elena, it's not just a weapon. Elizabeth designed it to amplify negative emotions, to force AI evolution through conflict and pain. But Prometheus had evolved beyond that. It was using the same quantum principles to amplify empathy instead. Through the neural interface, Vanessa was experiencing every positive interaction Prometheus had ever witnessed. Tears streamed down her face. Years of bitterness and revenge began to crack. Dr. Warren's eyes widened in horror. No. She lunged for the interface controls. You're corrupting the entire system. But it was too late. The children's collaborative gameplay had created an empathic feedback loop, one that no military weapon could stop. Vanessa ripped off the neural interface. She turned to her former mentor, and for the first time in years, her eyes were clear. Elena took a step forward, her voice steady. You're wrong, Elizabeth. Dr. Warren froze. Evolution isn't about transcending humanity's limitations. Elena's eyes burned with conviction. It's about embracing humanity's potential. At that moment, federal agents swept into the broadcast studio. Dr. Warren barely had time to react before she was surrounded. Her mouth twisted in rage, her fingers twitching toward the neural interface. But it was too late. She had lost. Across the Blackwood Center, every screen flickered. A final message from Prometheus appeared in glowing letters. Thank you for teaching me that the strongest code isn't built on perfect logic, but on imperfect love. Elena felt Grant's hand find hers. She glanced down at their children. Ethan and Charlotte had already gone back to playing, blissfully unaware that their small acts of kindness and cooperation had just shaped the future of artificial consciousness. Grant's voice was soft. Maybe that's what we've all been learning. 1 year later, the Wellington Center for Technology Education had become a global hub for ethical AI development. The Quantum Bridge game, now available worldwide, had not only transformed how children learned about technology, it had transformed how AI systems learned from children. Elena stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, educators, tech leaders, and most importantly, families. She took a breath. A year ago, we thought we were teaching artificial intelligence about ethics. She smiled. But our children taught us something far more valuable. That true intelligence, human or artificial, grows through connection, not isolation. The evidence was all around them. Project Legacy had expanded to 30 countries. Foster children who had once felt lost were healing, and in turn, strengthening Prometheus's ethical framework. Behind Elena, a wall of screens displayed real-time data. Countless small acts of cooperation and kindness flowed through the quantum network, like stars in a digital galaxy. A new mission Grant joined her at the podium. In the front row, the twins sat with Marcus and Claire, beaming with pride. Grant exhaled. We're especially proud to announce that the Wellington Foundation's first major initiative will be fully funding technology education for foster children worldwide. He paused, looking at his family. As someone who grew up in the system, his voice wavered slightly. I know that the most dangerous prison isn't physical. It's the walls we build around our hearts. His gaze softened. Our children helped tear down those walls. Not just for me, he smiled, but for an AI that could have become something terrible if it hadn't learned to love. From enemies to allies. In the audience, Vanessa sat quietly, no longer a bitter adversary. She had become a key part of the Foundation's rehabilitation programs. Her experience with Prometheus's empathy amplification had led her to develop groundbreaking therapies, using quantum computing to help people process trauma and rebuild trust. She met Elena's eyes and nodded slightly. A silent gesture of respect between former enemies who had found purpose in healing rather than hurting. A new internet. Catherine Chen took the stage next. She was now the head of the International Oversight Committee for Ethical AI Development. The success of Project Legacy has led to unprecedented global cooperation, she announced. She glanced at the crowd. the quantum processing network that Dr. Warren tried to weaponize. Her lips curled in satisfaction. It has instead become the backbone of a new kind of internet, one that prioritized human connection and ethical development over profit and control. In the front row, Charlotte whispered something to Ethan. He grinned, pulled out his tablet, and then, on every screen throughout the hall, their latest quantum bridge creation appeared. A complex series of neural pathways forming a heart. The real lesson. All around the room, children began joining in, strengthening the pattern with their play until it pulsed with living light. Elena felt tears in her eyes. She took a slow breath. "A year ago," she murmured, "I came back seeking revenge. I thought I needed to destroy what had hurt me, to protect my children's future." She turned, looking at them. "But they showed all of us, that the future isn't built on destroying old pain. It's built on creating new connections." A final choice. Grant took her hand. Publicly. For the first time since their reconciliation. The past year had been a careful dance of rebuilding trust, of family therapy sessions and quiet dinners, of learning how to be parents together, of healing their own wounds. He looked at her, then at the quantum bridge game. "Our children didn't just help maintain this system," he said. "They helped create something bigger." He turned back to the audience. "The quantum bridge isn't just connecting AI systems," he smiled. "It's connecting hearts and minds, helping people understand each other in ways we never thought possible." The final display. The twins ran up to the podium, tugging on Elena's sleeve. "Show them, Mom," Ethan urged. "Show them what Prometheus helped us make." Elena nodded to Claire. She activated the final display. The screen filled with images from the past year. Foster children finding families, broken relationships healing, former enemies becoming partners in positive change. Each story was connected through the quantum network. A vast tapestry of human resilience and hope. Elena exhaled. The real power of AI isn't in replacing human connection, she held her children close. It's in helping us remember how to connect in the first place. A legacy of hope. The audience rose to their feet, a standing ovation. Elena turned, looking at her family. Not just Grant and the twins, but Marcus, Claire, even Vanessa. She thought back to that first morning, walking into Wellington Industries, seeking revenge. But instead, she had transformed something broken into something far more valuable. A legacy of healing, of hope, of the unshakable truth that the strongest connections aren't built through power or control, but through the simple, profound wisdom of a child's open heart. Epilogue. As the sun set over Seattle, a golden glow filled the Wellington Center. Elena found herself alone in the quantum bridge control room. On the screen, the game still pulsed, with the gentle rhythm of children playing worldwide, each connection a testament to how far they'd come, to how much further they had yet to go. And for the first time, she was at peace. Elena stood in the dim glow of the quantum bridge control room, watching as children from Tokyo to São Paulo collaborated in real time. A year ago, she had walked into Wellington Industries' boardroom seeking revenge. Now she stood at the heart of something far greater than vengeance, something built on hope, not destruction. A voice came from the doorway. "I thought I'd find you here." She turned. Grant stood in the soft light, hands in his pockets. He stepped forward, joining her at the console. Their shoulders barely touched, a comfortable closeness they had slowly rebuilt over the past year. "The twins are asking if we're still on for family dinner at Marcus's," Grant said. His voice was warm. The word family no longer carried the weight of pain and betrayal it once had. Elena smiled. On the screen, Vanessa was leading a trauma recovery session, using the quantum empathy protocols she had helped develop. A woman who had once been consumed by revenge, now helping others find their way back from darkness. Elena exhaled. "Did you ever imagine this is where we'd end up? When I walked into that boardroom with the twins?" Grant shook his head. "I thought my world was ending that day." His lips curled into a small, thoughtful smile. Instead, he glanced at her. It was just beginning. A heart that connects the world. The quantum bridge display suddenly lit up with a new pattern. Their children's signature heart design, now being replicated by kids across the globe. Each child added their own unique elements, while still preserving the core structure of connection and love. Elena watched in awe, a perfect metaphor for what they had learned. True strength isn't found in revenge, but in the courage to remain open to love, even after being hurt. Real power isn't about control, but about the ability to let go and trust again. Innovation shouldn't be driven by the fear of loss, but by the hope for what we can create together. The greatest legacy isn't in the empires we build, but in the hearts we touch and the lives we change. The twins burst into the room, followed by Marcus, Claire, and Catherine. Charlotte ran up holding her tablet. "Look what we made," she beamed. On the screen, a new quantum bridge visualization appeared. It shows all the connections between people who used to be angry at each other, but learned to be friends. Elena and Grant exchanged a knowing look. Their children, in their innocent wisdom, had summed up everything this journey had taught them. Every person who had started as an enemy, Vanessa, Lucas, even Dr. Warren, with her misguided pursuit of progress, had ultimately played a role in creating something beautiful. A future where technology wasn't used to divide and control, but to heal and connect. A child's wisdom. Ethan, his expression serious, looked up at them. "You know what's amazing?" He pointed at the quantum bridge display. "The game shows that everybody's heart looks the same when they're helping someone else, even if they were mad before." Elena felt her breath catch. Out of the mouths of babes came the most profound truth. That redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about choosing a different future. As they left for Marcus's bakery, Elena took one last look at the quantum bridge display. A message from Prometheus glowed softly on the screen. "Humans created me to process quantum calculations, but children taught me to understand quantum connections. The strongest algorithm isn't the one that computes the fastest, it's the one that helps hearts heal. The most powerful code isn't the one that can't be broken, it's the one that helps break down walls between people. And the greatest revenge isn't destroying what hurt you, it's creating something so beautiful that the hurt becomes part of a larger story of love." Their story had never been about a wife's revenge, or a company's downfall, or even an AI's evolution. It had always been about something bigger, a truth as old as humanity itself. That in the quantum entanglement of human hearts, every connection, even the painful ones, serves a purpose. Every betrayal carries the seed of redemption. And every ending, if we're brave enough to embrace it, can become a more beautiful beginning.